Hey teammates, welcome to another episode of It's All About the Team. And we're here on the campus of Baldwin Wallace University. When I graduated 50 years ago, it was Baldwin Wallace College, and I'm here with the greatest coach in the history of Baldwin Wallace, Coach Cheri Harrer.
We have two non-negotiables. You have to be a great teammate and you have to be super competitive to actually be on a recruiting list.
When there probably was NIL back then, because I'll tell you what happened. When you went to an away game, if you won, they gave you $2. If you lost, you got $1. That was just the way it was.
How you do anything is how you do everything. And again, if you have high standards for yourself, generally you're going to do that in every phase of your life. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm not sure why I'm here, all the big names you've had on this podcast. It's a little overwhelming, but I appreciate the shout out.
Well, you know what? We love to talk about building teams, whether they're engineering teams or businesses or sports teams. And our mission with It's All About the Team is people that watch or listen, if they're trying to be a better teammate, they can pick up some thoughts. If they're somewhere trying to build a team of some sort in a community or in a school or at home or wherever. So, we love to talk about people who have built great teams. And, if our people pan the Lady Jackets locker room here that we're shooting from, there's 20 pictures up there of teams who have either won the Ohio Athletic Conference and or been in the NCAA tournament, and that's pretty good teams.
Yeah, we've been really blessed. Great players, but great players who wanted to be part of something special, and thus the teams.
Well, you started out life living on a farm. Mm-hmm. So my dad, who was a coach here at Baldwin Wallace many moons ago, grew up on a farm.
In Ada, Ohio, right?
In Ada, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And you were in Winford?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Crawford County.
Crawford County. And so if you had to think about early lessons of building a team, it takes a team to run a farm, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Anything pop in your mind that you learned at an early age?
Well, I was just thinking this morning, I don't know if you saw Farmer Wants a Wife last night. It's a TV show. But I'm thinking none of those women would do what my mom did. My mom was out there helping drive tractors, and it's obviously it's a family farm, and she did that until my brother was old enough to kind of take her place. So, you saw the teamwork that had to happen there, as well as just the hard work overall. There are no vacations. Like when things need to be done, you just get it done.
Well, my dad's parents were dairy farmers.
Okay.
And small crop. They didn't have a large farm when it came to crops, but he was a butcher. They were dairy farmers. And my dad coached for 33 years as a head coach. And to my recollection, my grandpa only saw him coach one time in those 33 years that I can recall. Because the cows, every morning and every afternoon, there were no vacation days. There's no PTO or whatever people talk about nowadays. But we played Ohio Northern at Ohio Northern, and it happened to be my dad's 50th victory of his Baldwin Wallace career. And my grandpa was pulled in the end zone, sitting in his truck, watching the game, and that's the only game I can ever remember. So the teamwork and the sacrifice and running that operation, Grandma would be up, they'd milk the cows, and we'd go have the biggest breakfast you ever saw, and you'd be back out in the fields, and Grandpa would look up at the sun and say, I bet your lunch is ready. You'd walk in, and they were just putting down the lunch and all the rest, and so that sacrifice, that teamwork, that work ethic, can't find it any better way.
Yeah, dairy's even tougher than anything else.
Tough.
When you're dealing with the cows that need milked on a regular schedule.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of my great thrills was going out in the manure spreader, looking out in the fields to find out if any of the cows had calves. So you'd go and bring them in the manure spreader and bring them back to the barn, and
gosh.
Those were the greatest days. But my dad's family, everyone really followed the farming tradition, but he decided he wanted to be a coach.
Wow.
And which was a little bit different than the rest of the group. You wanted to go into education, be a teacher, be a coach, and they couldn't understand that. And I remember they asked, well, what are the values of sports? And my dad would say, well, hard work. And they said, well, we got plenty of hard. We don't need any more of that. But what made you decide you wanted to be a coach?
Actually, I was going to be a veterinarian till 8th grade. I had it was actually the junior high principal at the time coached our boys' 8th grade team. We had no girls junior high team.
Okay.
And he actually asked me if I wanted to participate on the boys' 8th grade team. And one thing led to another. It was early in Title IX, and I ended up not being able to compete because of just the chaos that would have caused. But he allowed me to practice the whole time, and he's the first guy that talked to me about teaching and coaching. And from then on, it pretty much was what I was going to do.
So you decided to go to Findlay. Mm-hmm. And did they have a women's team by then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a high school team. We just didn't have junior high.
Oh, you just didn't have junior high.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I played on our high school team.
And then went on to Findlay. And who was the coach at Findlay?
Well, I had two different ones. It was Doris Glass, recruited me. I played for her for 3 years. And she was, at that time, they were coaching multiple sports. And she was much more of a volleyball person than basketball, but she coached both. And then Cheryl Neff my senior year.
So if you had to think of Doris and what she taught you about building a team or being a great teammate, what would you think back as to what you might have learned?
Boy, that was tough because we weren't great when I first got there, but we got better as we went. And I think it really sparked my interest in what are teams really about. In fact, it was so much so I did independent study in grad school shortly after that on team cohesion because we went from bad to decent. We'd won our league and those kinds of things. And the talent was good, but not necessarily that much better. So I was like, what was the difference there? And that's when I started really studying more about what makes a great team. And
then your senior year, you have a new coach. What was that transition like?
It wasn't real pleasant.
Yeah.
And, and that's the thing. I had 3 different coaches in high school and then 2 different coaches in college. So in my 8 years of playing, I had 5 different coaches. I learned a lot about what worked for me and what didn't work for me. And it really shaped, no matter if it was a good experience or a bad experience, it shaped my coaching, I think, what I learned from each of those experiences.
One of the lessons I learned going in to take over a team, so when we went to Youngstown State, they had good success, and they had a couple years that weren't as good, and Coach Narduzzi had some health issues, and so they made a change, and so I was a young guy going in there, and that first year, the thing I tried to really work on was help them appreciate all the success they'd had and not go in and say, well, we're going to do everything different, and I have all the answers, and that type of thing. And so that first year we were 2-9, but I really thought we were building the blocks of having the kind of team, and then the same thing kind of happened at Ohio State. When I went there, of course they'd had all the success for generations, but they'd had a couple tough years in a row and hadn't fared well in the rival game, and I felt really compelled to make sure those people knew that I didn't have all the answers. And so when you came then did you come right from college to Baldwin Wallace, or a couple steps in between?
Couple steps in. I first was a graduate assistant for Fran Vole at Bowling Green.
Oh, okay.
And he was obviously excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent coach. It was just there. That was an 18-month, 15-month graduate assistantship. You had to finish in that amount of time and move on. And then I was at Bluffton for a year, then back at Findlay for 3 before I came here.
All right, so lesson best learned from Coach Vole at BG?
It was really amazing is he kept it so simple. And he just did the same thing every day, but what they did was really, really solid, really good. So I learned that playbook doesn't have to be an inch thick. You can just do a few things really well. That's probably the biggest thing I learned from him.
And then who was the head coach at Bluffton?
Kim Fisher was her name, again, another volleyball person who happened to coach basketball as well.
Well, that was the life we lived. Even when I was here at Baldwin Wallace as a player, all the football coaches were the head coach of some other sport. Coach Fisher in baseball, and Coach Demerly was the assistant track coach, and my dad was an assistant coach in basketball, and then he was like the head golf coach, and we didn't have quite the staff sizes, and so then when you got back to Findlay, was it still the same coach you played for, or?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And how had you seen her grow?
As much as anything, I wanted to add value for the players. I'm not sure, because she was also coaching volleyball and softball.
Oh.
So, the amount of time that she had, and when I went back in admissions. I worked in admissions for a year, and then I became sports information director for a year and the next year. So none of us, to your point, we wore a lot of different hats,
right.
But just trying to be there for the players and help them through their experience, I think was my biggest motivation in doing that.
A little bit off topic, but one of the conversations I've had with institutions of higher education is it seems like we have more people doing one thing than we had back in the day, and I'm sure it wasn't perfect back in the day, but there was some camaraderie about you not just being focused. Like right now, you're still a professor, so you're still with the student body. You're not just with your 24 young ladies or whatever. And I know we need to get more efficient in higher education because the resources are limited. I'm seeing that a little bit in government, in my new role, that we need to maybe get more efficient, and I think we'll get more effective. But that's for a discussion another day. So how'd you end up here? Was it Coach Bankston was the AD when you came here, or who was the AD?
Marcy French was actually split yet. It was a men's and men's AD, men's athletic department, women's athletic department. Actually, the PE was switched, was separated too. There was a women's HPE department and a men's HPE department.
Wow.
So all those names you mentioned, I knew all those folks yet, but everybody taught as well. But Marcy French hired me, and June Boffman was headed. So it had to be a joint hire because I was teaching. 60% of my load was actually teaching. 40% was coaching. It was tough.
Well, we just have celebrated Sue Strue's 90th birthday. She was on that HPE staff and a dear friend. And the team camaraderie of the department and the university to this day is the most special thing I remember about Baldwin Wallace, that whether you're in the faculty or in the staff, you're in the maintenance crew, I don't know how that team was created. As you think back to what you felt when you got here, what was it that made this a team atmosphere? Yeah,
I think it started at the top. Neil Malachi was as much of a team leader as anyone I've ever been around. He cared about everybody. He, there were high standards, but at the same time, the relationships were first with him, and I think that just, bled down through everybody.
So my dad was the head coach here for 23 years and the athletic director for probably 20. And Dr. Bonds was the president the whole time. And not unlike Dr. Malachi, when you began, Dr. Bonds had that family atmosphere. He was really a music guy.
No kidding.
Yeah, but he believed in every component of the university, the athletic department, obviously the academic sector, and the great tradition we have here in the conservatory and in the musical theater and all those things. But the understanding that everyone's important, I can't emphasize enough, and I hear that from all of our guests. It's so at what age were you first a head coach?
26.
Whew.
Yeah.
26.
Yeah.
And who were you taking over for?
It was actually a little chaotic situation before I got here. Bonnie Ray was the coach. She had gotten ill and had passed away, and they had an interim head coach who did not have her master's degree, so she couldn't become the head coach. And so it was a search, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get the position.
How times change. When I interviewed for the Youngstown State job in 1986, December of 85, it was mandatory that you have a master's. Now, I'm not sure that's the case right now in Division I athletics. It might still be in Division III. But so you got the job. What was task one to start building this amazing team you've built?
Finding the right people. And when I say right people, it wasn't just the most talented. I really started to look for people who had a competitive edge, a work ethic, and who were great teammates. And we've been pretty much that same way ever since. We have 2 non-negotiables. You have to be a great teammate, and you have to be super competitive to actually be on a recruiting list, besides being a talented
And I
athlete.
think you have to be a pretty good student.
Yeah, that goes. And we have a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. Normally, a student who's a really good student doesn't cut corners, and then they don't do, they do the same thing on the basketball court. They're going to be attention to detail, and they're going to try to do things the right way and have high standards for themselves, just like they do in the classroom. So we generally, unless they're 3.5 or above, we generally, even though something lower than that might get into BW, we don't go there.
So turn to that camera and give that thought again about how you do anything.
Yeah, we say how you do anything is how you do everything. And again, if you have high standards for yourself, generally you're going to do that in every phase of your life.
No question. And what a great reminder. I've heard that concept. I've never heard that exact line. How you do anything is how you do everything. Sometimes, as I was a coach, that was a tough conversation with some of our guys. They all thought they were going to the NFL and so forth, and why do I have to, take biology or, whatever. And we didn't use your line, but we said, you know what? Why can't you be the best student you can be? Mm-hmm. You want to be the best player. You want to get a C? That's like us being 6 and 5.
Exactly.
So we want to be undefeated. So don't you want to get an A? And that conversation, we had to have a lot, but you know what? They ended up appreciating it because, all of a sudden they got that interest in being good at every stage, whether it's out doing community service, be the best, pay attention. Don't just, be there. Yep. Make a difference in the classroom. And so do you remember who your first recruiting class was? Because I remember each of my startup program things, that first group that came in and how you meshed them with the people, who you were fortunate to retain. Remember that first recruiting class?
Yeah, Amy Sander was one of them, and she actually happens to be an associate head coach at Minnesota Mankato, who's won a national championship.
Wow.
While she's there.
And where was she from?
Genoa, Ohio.
Genoa, sure.
Yeah, Danielle Spansky was from Vermillions. Recruiting was different then because it was so hard to get outside of your area. Now we're recruiting from Cincinnati and out of state and so forth because you can, but because it's easier to find people, it's easier to see them play. But and I had the reputation for quite some time of screwing seniors because each class got a little bit better. Without scholarships, you're just trying to convince them on a dream, sell a dream, and the dream was happening slowly, not overnight. And so it was rough for some of those kids early because each class was a little bit better, and unless you got better, those kids were passing you. And then we finally got to the point now where it's tougher to play as a freshman because we have some really good upperclassmen.
Well, I was at your conference championship game when you beat Ohio Northern, and you have a long bench.
Yeah.
And there's so much value to being on the team, and of course you want to play and work your way up, but there's so much value on trying to figure out what do I have to do to get better. And unfortunately, we could get into a long discussion about the portal thing. Does Division III have the same portal problem?
Some programs might. Some programs actually bring in a lot more fifth years. The UAA tends to do that more because of their graduate programs. We have not used the portal much. The only kids we've contacted out of the portal have been kids we recruited the first time because we know they're a fit for us. But yeah, it's tough having that many kids.
Right.
And to your point earlier, helping each one feel valued and them understanding that they bring value regardless of the amount of time they're on the court is a challenge. And that's why the team is so big. We had 24 people to start the year, and we finished with 24 because and Cody Hartzler is our associate head coach. Actually, he's fantastic. He probably should be sitting in this chair talking with you more than I should, but does a great job connecting with those kids. And between the two of us, we really work to have everybody feel like they are an important part of what we do. They bring a huge amount of value, whether it be in practice, the energy they bring, what kind of teammate they are. As a team, we're all about the team.
Right. Hey teammates, I want to tell you about a project we're working on with Youngstown State University. One of the ways Ellen and I have decided to give back is through the Trestle Institute for Leadership and Teamwork. We've collected a set of successful business and nonprofit leaders to serve as guest servant leaders in partnership with the Sokolov Honors College to teach university students teamwork, leadership, and personal skills. We teach from a foundation built on gratitude, excellence, hope, love, and selflessness. If you're a young person or parent helping to search for a unique college experience, you can learn more at trestleinstitute.ysu.edu or ysu.edu. Links will be provided in the show notes. Well, you know, it's interesting. Whenever I go to a game, and I'm not a very good spectator, everyone says, do you want to go to this? Well, I'd rather watch your team on TV and watch the replay, and as opposed to sitting in the crowd, hey, let's take a picture, all that stuff. But when I do go to a game, the first thing I look at are the benches. And if there's some enthusiasm on the bench, we have a chance to have a great team. Mm-hmm. And I was just at my middle brother Dave's son's wife's volleyball game the other night in Columbus, Ohio. And they have a very good team, and they're playing in the regional semifinals or something. And they were better than the other team, and so they advanced. And so she asked me after the game, well, what'd you think? We didn't play our best. And I said, well, I don't know that much about volleyball. It looked pretty good to me. And we didn't have men's volleyball when I was growing up, so we played it all the time in intramurals, and we know how athletic a sport volleyball is. And I said, so I guess they looked okay. I said, but I will tell you this: the other team's bench had a little bit more enthusiasm than yours did, and I don't know if you'll be able to get to the Final Four with that enthusiasm level on your bench, because the whole group being a part of it is so critical. And now when we were in school, I don't know if you still do it now, but we had JV teams. Is there a JV schedule nowadays?
We'll try to play a game or two. We don't have a separate JV situation.
So when I was a freshman at Baldwin Wallace, we had 109 freshmen. I was one of 12 quarterbacks. And we had 2 JV games every Monday night.
Wow.
Yeah. We had a away game and a home game every Monday, because my dad wanted the guys to get to play. I mean, you didn't come here to school. Right. And he didn't know with all those guys. And not many freshmen played on the varsity. Mm-hmm. And you might get to dress or whatever. But I remember one game we went over my freshman year to play Heidelberg. And what we always knew, and there probably was NIL back then, because I'll tell you what happened. When you went to an away game, if you won, you came back on the bus, they gave you $2 to go out and get a sandwich, because the dining hall was closed or whatever, and McDonald's cost 55 cents or whatever. If you lost, you got $1. That was just the way it was. So we went over to Heidelberg. They broke us up and split the teams, and we beat Heidelberg over there. Well, we got back to Finney Stadium, and it was halftime, and we were playing Ashland, and we were behind. And so we were carrying our bags down the steps there toward the locker room, and they grabbed about 3 or 4 of us and said, hey, look, you got to get dressed. We're not losing to Ashland. And so I had gotten my $2 at Heidelberg, and I thought, if we could win this game, I could get two more dollars, and $4 will last me like a week, So we dressed and we came back and we beat Ashland, but every Monday night there were 2 games.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great thing though to get experience.
Oh yeah. And I think what happened, 109 guys came. We all became buddies. They fell in love with Baldwin Wallace and so forth, but only 17 ended up seniors because not everyone got to play, and they got involved in their academic program or their activities on campus. But they stayed, I think, because they had that good experience of getting to play, and people realize if the other person's better, you know what? I'll fight through it for a while, but if it becomes apparent, but keeping that whole team together, that's why I marveled watching your game. I'm thinking, there's 24 kids now. And you played, I don't know, 8 or 9, it seemed like.
Yeah, 10 to 12
10
usually.
to 12 was it? Yeah. And all
Still-
I remember is
still less than
the
half.
left-hander hit the number 21, hit the key bucket to win the championship, and that whole 24 bench just was out of their minds, so one of the things growing up in coaching I liked to do was read about people who did a great job building teams. And so my idols were, Tom Landry and Grant Taff, and John Wooden was my all-timer. I read everything he ever did and got his tapes and all that kind of thing. So who did you study?
All of the above. Football, so Bill Walsh, your book, Winner's Manual, Urban Meyer's Above the Line. Even before that, they were Bill Parcells, all those guys. Anson Dorrance with North Carolina women's soccer.
Oh, he was. In fact, Lori Walker was the I think the goalie, and she's been our head coach at Ohio State for 20-some years.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
she played on those championship teams.
Yeah.
I used to go over and study from Lori.
Yeah.
Because she was with Anson,
Yep.
and that's one thing we encourage our viewers and listeners is, it's great. We hope they listen and learn from It's All About the Team, but go read. Coach Wooden used to say, drink deeply
From good
books, right? And that's something you can't encourage enough. And the good thing with our youth is that they're used to their device, but we got to make sure we use the device for the right things. And if you can get great knowledge and learn from others, and so as you think about the coaches you've coached against, I always felt like I learned a lot about what I do and not do, both, from the people I competed with. Tell us some of the people that you've competed against that you think have done a great job with teams.
Wow, there's so many. In our conference, they're just, I don't know that there's a weak coach in our conference. Obviously, it's changed. When I first got here, there were Donna Newberry been to a Final Four, Gail Loth over at Ohio Northern. We're kind of the old timers. Dixie Jeffers obviously had
Capital.
had a lot of success at Capital. And when you prepare for them, you see more of the X's and O's. It's really harder to find out more about their culture, other than, to your point, watching, observing how their kids act. But yeah, there's always, in fact, Bob Starkey at LSU would tell you he learned most of his basketball through scouting, because you got to see how everybody did, how so many different programs do different things, X and O wise, technical.
So
things.
Speaking of scouting, when my dad was the coach here, Division III was not allowed to go off campus to recruit.
Wow.
When did that change?
Well, it must have changed before I got here, because from the time I was here. And that's why I think the staffing has changed so much, because recruiting has become so competitive.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how a single coach without assistants could ever, number one, evaluate players, and then you have to cast pretty wide net in Division III. Just be impossible, I think, to build a winning program without the right assistant. When I first got here, I didn't have any.
Yeah.
And I was falling asleep on my desk at times because, I'm teaching 60% of my load at the same time, and trying to do it all was really, really challenging. But, yeah, the recruiting piece has probably changed the most.
So what I recall growing up watching Division III recruiting was how much time my dad spent on the phone. Because, like you said, the net was so wide. He wanted to get to know people, and he'd be over in his office every night till 9:30 at night, placing phone calls, and he didn't have a scholarship to offer, so he just had a team, and he wanted to convince them, that they wanted to be a part of that team, and so let's take a trip down memory lane of your championship teams, and maybe pick somebody, and I know it's hard to pick because the other players say, oh, what about me, and all that, but give us some stories about how some of your key people helped in the locker room, and here we sit in the locker room, build that team, because that's, to me, was so critical.
Yeah, I think that the best people have been the best connectors. And we actually, in building our teams, we start there. That what we don't want is a bench forced to react in a game. We want them to react because they really care about the people on the floor doing well. And it starts with that connection piece, really caring about each other. And we've had some great teams, but the one that sticks out to me most right now, a young lady named Jen Neal, is our... golly, what was that? I can't remember which year it was. Nikki Altenweg and Jen Neal were the seniors that year. I could find it if I looked up there. But at the beginning of that season, Jen made the statement that was her goal for every single player on the team to feel valued. And kind of took that, like her wisdom, and took that into all our future teams, and that making sure that every single person feels like they matter. And that team was great. They went, golly, we lost in the Elite Eight that year to Scranton, and maximized that team. But those have been our best ones, the ones that really helped the team connect to each other.
Mr. DeBartolo used to always talk about his 49er teams, and when those best players were the best people in the locker room, the most unselfish people, the people with the best work ethic, that gives you a chance, because everyone else is going to follow Jerry Rice. They're going to follow Joe Montana.
Absolutely.
And if they're going the wrong direction, they're going to follow him the wrong direction. And so the question I used to get when I was well into my career, and you're well into your career now, the winningest coach in the history of the Ohio Athletic Conference, men and women, 735 wins or whatever the number is, probably half of them in this building, and I would always get asked, well, how are kids different today than when you started? And what do you think you have had to do differently over time?
Yeah, obviously they need to know the why more. You have to talk a whole lot more about patience. They don't have a lot of patience to start with. They're used to having everything. They can look up anything they want on their phone in a second. So just really helping them to understand that this is a process. It's not going to happen overnight for you, and we're here to help you through that. But I think the parenting has changed more than the kids have changed.
That was always my first answer was, I don't think the kids have changed. I think the parents have.
Absolutely.
I wonder how that happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I think every parent, obviously every parent loves their child. And I think it's really gone back to trying to make the way smooth for the child versus helping them learn lessons along the way. And it's just hindered them in being able to handle when things get tough, because mom and dad have always made sure it wasn't tough for me. So,
well, the value of participating on that team, doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter what kind of team it is, the values you learn about selflessness and work ethic and handling adversity and all those things, that's what you gain from being a part of a team. The problem is it seemed at some point in time to evolve to, well, what I'm going to value as a trophy, or what I'm going to value as a scholarship, or notoriety, and think maybe it changed for the parents, because I remember when I was a junior in high school, preseason football practice ended, and they announced who the starters were going to be going into week one, who was going to work with the first string. And I remember coming home, sitting down. My dad was at the table, and I don't know if you ever had a chance, probably never had a chance to meet my dad, did you?
No, I did not.
So he was a man of very few words.
I have heard that.
Yeah, and I was so excited to tell him that I'm going to start, and I was a junior, and it was a battle in preseason, and the senior quarterback was a really talented kid, one of my dear friends, and way more athletic than I was, and so I just couldn't wait to get home. I said, Dad, Coach Madsey said I'm going to work with the first team and start the opening game. And he had his Cleveland Plain Dealer. He was, he didn't pay attention to, he was probably reading about sports. And he looked at me, he said, looked back at his paper. He said, He said, I saw one of the scrimmages. I would probably start Luther. And I was like, oh, okay. But that was, he wasn't like beating his chest because his son now was going to be the starting quarterback or something like that. And he probably knew what he was doing. He was digging me to don't get too comfortable, young man or whatever. And so I would always answer when asked that same question, I think the parents have changed. I think they don't know that they still really want for their child to learn the values that are going to help in the rest of their lives. I think if you asked them, do you want your children to learn the values of the rest of their life, they would say yes. But they would put a but. I really want them to win the trophy or get the scholarship or be able to brag about, put them on Facebook, or whatever. And the second thing that I would always think about when asked that question was the kids want clarification of what is expected of them. And if I had a nickel for every time one of them said, well, no one ever told me, or I didn't know, or I should be playing because, no one told me why I wasn't playing. And so they want to be evaluated, if they're worth their salt and wanting to be good, they want to be evaluated. And the third thing I would always say is, and the really good ones don't want you to sugarcoat it. They don't want to be patted on the back saying everything's wonderful if everything's not wonderful. They want to be coached. And so do you see kids today, or do you try to find kids today that want to be coached? Yeah,
and I think, again, it goes back when they're good students. They often, they're going to push themselves. They're wired that way to be the best. They want to be the best they can be. And so most of them want to be coached when they're wired that way. Right? Now, at the same time, especially women, I don't know if there's a gender difference, but they beat themselves up pretty good too. So they need plenty of pats on the back at the same time. And finding that being demanding without being demeaning, and at the same time building them up, I think is one of the tougher challenges, right? Like you want to help them. They want to be the best they can be, and they're going to push, they're going to work. So helping them do that, and at the same time helping build their confidence as much as you can.
I learned a valuable lesson on that because I didn't only coach guys, right? And so then all of a sudden I became the athletic director. Okay, so now I've got all my women's teams at Youngstown State, and I kept saying to myself, okay, I've got to make sure that I go above and beyond to take care of my other sports, because they'll think, oh, you're giving everything to football. So, and I remember talking with my softball coach, and we didn't have any money, budget problems, and we were looking at how we could cut corners, and I said, do we really need to travel the whole team to the away games? Could we save a little bit? And you have 22 players, and I mean, how many? I don't know your sport that well. How many could we get away with? She said, oh, no. I said, well, okay, help me understand this. I've got 105 football players, and the league says we can only travel 56. So you think we could get away with 16 out of the 20? No, you don't understand that if my girl's sitting back there and the rest of the team, that's just not healthy, so you live and learn.
Mm-hmm.
100%
agree.
Right?
Yep.
And it was almost like, hey, we'll throw 4 in a room if we have to stay overnight. But you gotta
Yep.
make sure that everyone's a part of it.
Yeah. When you go back to talking about a team,
Yeah.
like, I think it's different when you leave 50 back versus leaving a handful back. Like they feel totally disconnected if you were to do that. I agree with her 100%.
Yeah. Well, I listened to her because I said, okay, I'll find somewhere else to save money. But it was a good learning lesson. And to your point, when there's as many people left back as go, that's different than 18 out of 22 are going.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how the sport of women's basketball has boomed. And I mean, my 10-year-old grandson is in Indiana. I mean, Caitlin Clark is better than Dr. J. I mean, and I mean he's out in the yard. He's Caitlin Clark. And he thinks he can shoot threes like her, and plus he does her mannerisms. A little three. All that. I want to hit him on the head. But talk us through how you've seen women's basketball just take off.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think Caitlin Clark has had a ton to do with it. She attracted so much interest, and then as people watched Caitlin, they realized there's a lot of good players. And hopefully that's been a little bit of trickle down. The gym was as electric for our OAC championship and NCAA tournament games as anytime I've seen the guys. And I think there were a lot of things to do with that. Obviously the women's basketball piece, but even just the energy our kids gave, I think, just made it fun to watch. And but hopefully we can help build on what Caitlin Clark has started.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. At Youngstown State, we have a great following from our women's basketball.
No kidding, that's awesome.
Oh my gosh, I think we led the league in attendance for years and years. And the enthusiasm. And what I'd hear the old timers say is that they think there's just a little bit more basketball strategy, they feel, as opposed to just you go down and dunk everything or just shoot a three. But it's rocking and rolling. And were you surprised that Gino and those guys ended up winning it all?
No, Gino obviously knows how to build a team too.
Right?
Yeah, and he has great talent, but there's a lot of teams with great talent.
Yeah.
And he gets the most out of his kids, and so was not surprised at all. And they have a great player in Paige Beckers, as well. But Sarah Strong, he has a lot of good pieces there, as do a lot of coaches. And there's so many good coaches. Don Staley, you name it. And it's, and sometimes what you don't know, back to the teams part, is the behind the scenes. Are they truly connected? They giving off that image, or are they really connected to each other? And I think the UConn team was really connected to each other. Well,
and they hadn't won it since Paige was there, and we often talked about the best teams we had were the ones who had suffered the most, prior to that particular season. And
Tony Bennett, University will buy you a ticket that you may not have gotten otherwise.
Right. No, it's so the lady that dresses all crazy at LSU.
Kim Mulkey.
Kim. So the media wants to play up how she dresses, but they don't know what she does behind the scenes to build a team. And that's where, I've always believed that athletics teaches us how to be a team, a community, a civilization. And we've allowed a little bit of the media to use us as a circus rather than a classroom. So we might give a scoop here. One last thing. We might give a scoop to the rest of the nation of our idea of a university. When we talk about, we were talking off camera here before, wouldn't it be cool if every student in your university was a part of a team?
Yep. And learn leadership along the way.
Right?
You could set yourself apart.
Yep.
We have employers all the time call. They want, every employer I talk to loves to have student athletes
no question.
as their employees.
Yep. No,
They start off way ahead of the rest. And to your
Yep.
point, they were part of a team.
They could be part of an engineering team, part of a musical team, part of a robotics team. If we mandated being a part of a team at every high school and university, I think we'd have a little bit better society.
Yep. You and I are on the same page on that one.
You heard it here
Yep.
first. The new university is going to be one that everyone is a part of a team. But this was awesome. The winningest coach in the history of the Ohio Athletic Conference at my alma mater. So proud. Appreciate you.
We're proud of you likewise. Yeah.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Till the next time, it's all about the team.